Hello friends, good evening. I welcome you all to another edition of Daily News Analysis. So in this particular edition, we are going to take a look at very important articles that are part of both Hindu as well as Indian Express newspapers. So particularly in the explain section, which is important from the perspective of prelims, we are going to discuss some important articles. The first one being no decision yet on updating NPR along with census. Important news to know what exactly is this National Population Register, along with it, how it is related to the census, what exactly is National Register of Citizens and how it is different from NPR is again important, particularly from the perspective of prelims. Another important article that we are going to discuss is about PM's recent visit to Namibia. Particularly important from the perspective of prelims to know in this news is Namibia's decision to roll out UPI in upcoming times. Important news, and also from the perspective of mapping, important to know interesting geography of Namibia as well. Another important article is about how can CAT bonds plan for natural disasters, particularly the concept of catastrophe bonds, again important, particularly from the perspective of GS3 economy, prelims as well as mains. Another important article is about stage set to redefine the second. So what exactly is the optical clocks now to actually measure the second? So essentially, from the perspective of science and technology, GS3 and prelims perspective, this particular article is very vital. In the decoded section, we are going to take a look at important article in the explain section titled Measuring Inequality. In recent times, we have seen the release of World Bank's latest poverty and equity brief. So that particular report actually gave some interesting analysis when it comes to India's inequality scene. So the analysis in this article actually counters some of the measurements in that particular report. So this analysis is particularly important from the perspective of particularly GS3 mains. So stay tuned. Particularly, the first article that we are going to discuss is about no decision yet on NPR. So essentially, what has happened now is the center has not yet decided whether to update National Population Register, particularly during the upcoming census of 27 or not. So essentially, senior Home Ministry officials have told in recent meeting that there is no decision has been made whether to take NPR along with census. So essentially, the first census using mobile apps for data collection will happen in 2027. In detail, we have covered that particular news in our recent DNA episodes. During a meeting on July 3-4, census directors were told that no final decision had been made and they would be informed at an appropriate time of the particular decision if it is ever made. Particularly, the Registrar General of India to Chief Secretaries of States also made no mention of NPR in the meeting. Particularly in particular letter of June 27, there is no mention of NPR as well. So what exactly is the National Population Register? So National Population Register is a comprehensive database of all usual residents of India. So who is called a usual resident, by the way? Usual resident is someone who has lived in an area for 6 months or more or intends to stay for the next 6 months. So this particular point here is important, particularly from the perspective of prelims. Note this down. So who is called a usual resident? Who has lived in an area for 6 months or who is going to stay for another 6 months. NPR particularly is the first step towards creating National Register of Citizens, NRC, as per Citizenship Rules of 2003 under the Citizenship Act of 1955. So essentially, the origin of NRC is Citizenship Act of 1955. Remember that. And under that act, we have the latest rules, Citizenship Rules of 2003 particularly. So essentially, in that regard, NPR is the first step towards that. See, registration is mandatory for all usual residents. So that's why, composing National Population Register in particular will help in that regard. Particularly when it comes to the timeline, NPR is first created in 2010 during the house listing and housing census phase of the 2011 census. So it is first started or created at the time of 2011 census. and it was updated in 2015-16. So essentially at that point of time you must have seen the hue and cry for national register in case of National Register of Citizens. So at that point of time there was a fear that this is the first step towards creation of National Register of Citizens, and some citizens may be excluded from that particular list. So those fears are to certain extent unfounded at that point of time, but it created a lot of controversy in 2015-16 at that point of time. Coverage contains household-wise data of approximately 919 crore of usual residents. So it has the usual resident data of almost 119 crore people. Data access, unlike census data, which is only released in aggregate, NPR data can be shared with center, state governments and agencies at the individual or household level. NPR data is in particular can be shared with states or center or state governments or departments and agencies at the individual and household level. But to certain extent, the census data, redacted census data is provided if it is needed, because there are always privacy concerns in that regard. Another important thing to understand is how NPR is different from Assam NRC. So in 2018-19, that time, at that point of time, we have seen the stir regarding NRC in Assam as well. So in that regard, knowing what exactly what exactly is this Assam NRC, and at the same time how it is different from NPR, important. Another, the purpose of NPR is to record all usual residents for administrative planning, while Assam NRC identifies genuine Indian citizens and detects illegal immigrants in Assam. So what is the legal basis for these two things, by the way? NPR, again, Citizenship Rule of 2003 under Citizenship Act of 1955, remember that. NRC in Assam particularly has the basis in Assam Accord of 1985 with Citizenship Act and Supreme Court monitoring at the same time. So particularly NRC in Assam has been conducted according to that Assam Accord, which was signed way back in 1985. So you must be knowing the history in that regard. We are not going to go in detail on that history part. What is the scope, by the way? NPR is a nationwide, NRC is Assam specific, citizenship link, NPR not linked to citizenship status. Remember that it is just a first step towards National Register of Citizens, but it is not linked to citizenship status. On the other hand, NRC directly impacts citizenship based on documents proving presence before March 24, 1971. So this is the cutoff date particularly for Assam NRC. Remember that. Data and outcome, NPR demographic database, no exclusion list, while NRC it is a proof based inclusion. Particularly in 2019 list itself, we have more than 2 million exclusions. So there are a lot of revisions in that regard at that point of time. So mostly these are some of the points which differentiates NPR from Assam's NRC. So in larger context also, because we are yet to have National Register of Citizens, so that's why I chose that particular NRC which has already been conducted in Assam itself. So that we can understand the difference properly. Background on census delay, particularly what is the background when it comes to census? In recent times we have seen the delay in census due to COVID pandemic, the official reason being the COVID pandemic. Again, the new census will happen in 2027 and the notification in that regard has been also been published. So now it is official. The first census since 2011 census will happen in 2027. So NPR questionnaire 2019 pre-test, there is mostly it includes date, place of birth of father and mother, mother tongue, voter ID, Aadhaar number, mobile phone number, driving license number, etc. are the data collected in those NPR databases. So how NPR is different from census, by the way? Scope and objective has been given here. You can see census is a comprehensive count of the entire population of demographics, social, economic profiling. Particularly NPR database of usual residents for administrative and governance purposes. So essentially, legal basis for census is Census Act of 1948. NPR has legal basis in Citizenship Act of 1955. And there are citizenship rules of 2003 as well under that particular act. So data collected is also very, very vital. As I earlier said, In census, detailed demographic, social, economic data like age, sex, education are measured, while or data collected. Basic demographic details are collected in NPR, may include biometric data like fingerprint and iris scan as well. Confidentiality is another important factor to know from the perspective of prelims. Data is anonymized, only aggregate data is released, particularly when it comes to census. While NPR, individual data is accessible to government agencies, privacy concerns do exist in NPR. So, there are some privacy concerns in NPR, but again NPR is for usual residents. Remember this particular fact, important from the perspective of prelims. So, this is the practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Next important article is about recent visit of Prime Minister Modi to Namibia. So, what the Prime Minister said in Namibia is India and Africa must work side by side. So, essentially India-Africa relations are flourishing. India being the 5th largest economic partner for whole of Africa has tremendous stakes in African governance and development as well. So, essentially when it comes to the news, Prime Minister visited Namibia on the final leg of his 5-nation tour. This was his first visit to Namibia and third ever by Indian Prime Minister. So, it is just third ever visit by Indian Prime Minister to that particular country. Remember that, Namibia. Addressed a special session of Namibian Parliament, he addressed special session and paid tribute to Namibia's founding leader Sam Nujoma. So, Sam Nujoma is considered as Namibia's founding leader, calling him a great friend of India. Modi was conferred Namibia's highest civilian honor as well. See, the freedom struggle of Namibia is also very interesting. Essentially, being a neighboring country of South Africa, it is also a victim of apartheid regime as well. So, the struggle waged by Sam Nujoma in that regard for his country's independence, freedom struggle is very inspiring as well. So, go through that as well. Particularly when it comes to another important news from the perspective of prelims, adoption of UPI by Namibia. Namibia will roll out UPI, Unified Payment Interface based digital payment system, later in 2025. So, essentially PM Modi congratulated Namibia during his address to the Namibian Parliament for becoming the first African nation to adopt India's UPI system. This particular fact is very vital. Remember that Namibia became first African nation to adopt UPI, part of a broader cooperation in digital technology, defense, healthcare, education, agriculture and critical minerals. So, there are expansive ties between the two countries in these particular areas, but the UPI adoption tops it all. The adoption follows technology licensing agreement signed in 2024 between NPCI and Bank of Namibia. So, technology licensing agreement in that regard was already signed in 2024. Strategic significance is very vital, marks a key step in expanding India's digital public infrastructure, diplomacy, reflects India-Africa cooperation in digital technology and fintech innovation. So, again it shows India's deeper ties and India's DPI emerging as a soft power tool for Indian diplomacy. Historic ties and decolonization support. So, in that regard, I just told you in brief about Namibia's freedom struggle. India supported Namibia's freedom struggle from 1940s onwards. The first diplomatic mission of SWAPO, South West Africa People's Organization, was opened in India, which provided material support to the mission. India was one of the first countries to raise Namibia's independence issue at the UN way back in 1946. Particularly, Namibia got the independence in 1990s, but in that regard, India was one of the first countries to raise Namibia's independence in UN way back in 1946. Key themes in Prime Minister Modi's address: India believes in cooperation, not competition with Africa, emphasized joint development, sustainable growth, value creation, urged Africa should lead in global development, not just supply raw materials, referred to Namibia's national plant Welwitschia mirabilis as a symbol of enduring Indo-Namibian friendship. So, remember this particular national plant Welwitschia mirabilis. So, this is a symbol of enduring Indo-Namibian friendship particularly. Agreements. So let's look at some of the agreements and outcomes of the visit. 4 major agreements were signed. First one being Entrepreneurship Development Center being established in Namibia. Health and medicine cooperation is there. Namibia joining CDRI, again important institution. Particularly, we have seen lot of disasters in recent times. So knowing about this particular institution, coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure is very, very vital. Namibia also joined Global Biofuel Alliance. So these 2 organizations are important, particularly from the perspective of prelim. Go through in detail who are the countries, what is the mandate, all those things when it comes to these two organizations. Other areas of bilateral focus, for example, digital technology, defense security, agriculture, healthcare, education, critical minerals. Particularly, Namibia is 3rd largest producer of uranium as well. So the cooperation in that regard is also very, very vital. So these are some of the cooperation areas. Particularly when it comes to mapping, the Namibia is a very, very interesting country. So you can see from the political map and physical map of Namibia some of the bordering countries. For example, there is Angola, there is Zambia, there is Botswana, and there is South Africa. Another important thing to understand is there is this strip, Caprivi strip. You can see clearly the Caprivi strip in this particular diagram here or map here. So particularly you can see there this Caprivi strip particularly extends to Zimbabwe as well. So whether Zimbabwe borders Namibia or not, important from the perspective of prelims. Zimbabwe is very close to Namibia's border, but they do not share a land border. Remember this particular fact here. Zimbabwe doesn't share land border with Namibia. So by the way, it is just actually separated by 150-meter bridge. So you can imagine how close they are, but they are not bordering countries because of that one fact. So Zimbabwe is not a bordering country of Namibia. Remember that. So what are the countries that has land border with Namibia? Angola and Zambia to the north, Botswana to the east, and South Africa to the south and southeast. To the west, Namibia's border is Atlantic Ocean, while Zimbabwe does not border Namibia. Remember this particular one fact. There is a Namib desert as well. You can see the peculiar geography of Namibia. And what is the primary reason for this Namibian desert? Can you guess the actual correct geographical reason behind the existence of this particular desert on such a vast territory of Namibia? Just comment your answer in the comment section. Important from the perspective of geography. This is the practice question for you. Again, important from the perspective of prelims. Comment your answer in the comment section. Another important article that we are going to discuss is about cat bond. So it is in no way related to cats. Cat here means catastrophe. So in recent times, we have seen lot of disasters. So particularly, there is a very low penetration of disaster risk insurance for individual property and livelihoods. On the other hand, we have seen the uplift when it comes to life insurance in recent times. So while the life insurance is widely known in India, disaster risk insurance remains uncommon. This leads to low insurance coverage for individual property and livelihood, leaving people vulnerable to significant, often unrecoverable losses. In this context, catastrophe bonds, cat bonds, can be used as they shift risk to financial markets. So particularly in the age of disasters, particularly managing the disasters also comes down to funding the disaster recovery. So in that regard, catastrophe bonds can give one effective solution. So what are catastrophe bonds, by the way? Cat bonds are unique hybrid insurance cum debt financial product that transforms insurance cover into a tradable security. They transfer hazard risk from the state to global insurers and global financial markets through securitization. So what is securitization, by the way? Securitization is the process of converting illiquid assets like loans or insurance risk into tradable financial instruments like securities. which can then be sold to investors. So essentially, to certain extent, catastrophe bonds can hedge the risk in that regard through securitization process. Structure: there is a sponsor, obviously, usually a sovereign nation, that pays the premium, with principal being the sum insured, but there is need of intermediaries as well. They issue the bond to reduce the counterparty risk. Intermediaries can include World Bank, Asian Development Bank, or reinsurance companies. Investor risk: if a disaster does occur, the investor runs the risk of losing a part of the principal. That is very much possible. Returns: offer high coupon rates on such bonds compared to regular debt instruments. Premium may vary with disasters. For example, earthquake, 1 or 2% have lower premiums than hurricanes or cyclones, because the frequency of hurricanes and cyclones is more on the global scale compared to earthquake. That is why the premiums rates may vary. Impact: cat bonds help in quick mobilization of disaster funds, as I earlier said, especially for countries with limited fiscal space. This will help. Particularly, are cat bonds profitable then? Diversification advantage is there. Cat bonds offer risk diversification, as disaster risk, particularly earthquakes, hurricanes, are independent of financial market risks, making them attractive for investors. So, they can be attractive for investors because they does not depend on the fluctuations in financial markets. Portfolio benefits, including de-risk on an investor's overall portfolio as they move differently from traditional financial instruments. Particularly, the movement of the portfolio in that regard is very different from traditional financial instruments, because it does not depend on the fluctuations in financial markets. Market size: since inception, there have been $180 billion worth of new issuance of cat bonds globally, with about $50 billion currently outstanding. So, there is uptick in catastrophe bonds acceptance, but in recent times the market is growing in that regard as well. Does India need a cat bond? By the way, India does need, given the climate change and the disproportionate impact it has on India's infrastructure, and overall disaster resilience is very vital. Climate change has made disaster risk costly for insurers, raising premium and lowering coverage. Governments can bridge this gap by sponsoring cat bonds. Government can sponsor cat bonds to shift risk to global financial markets and protect public finances for post-disaster reconstruction. Feasibility. So, what is the feasibility in this regard? India has a strong sovereign credit profile and could issue cat bonds cost effectively through intermediaries like World Bank. So, in considering India's own fiscal discipline and good sovereign credit ratings, India can have good record in catastrophe bonds with cost effective and with intermediaries like World Bank. The government already allocates $1.8 billion annually for disaster mitigation and capacity building since FY 21-22. So, already there are billions of dollars of investment by government. So, the catastrophe bond can give one effective solution in that regard. Regional potential: for example, overall South Asia cat bond with lead sponsor being India can also be looked at, particularly considering its low risk or the hazard risk in that regard are hedged in that regard. Particularly, what are the disadvantages, by the way? So, we have seen lot of advantages of cat bonds, but what are the disadvantages? Trigger risk: if poorly designed, a cat bond may not pay out even after a major disaster. For example, suppose you actually earthquake cat bond designed for a magnitude threshold of 6.6 magnitude, but suppose on the Richter scale it measured just 6.5 magnitude. So, but the extensive damage in that case also is very substantial. So, per se it may, what can be the trigger point for the risk is also not clear. No disaster, no payout. If no disaster occurs, the premium paid is also lost, and sometimes the premium payment itself is very high. Design complexity: accurate calibration of risk triggers is essential to avoid mismatch between the event and coverage. Cost benefit concern is also there. For example, justified justifying the premium expenses requires transparent government processes and comparison with historic post-disaster spending to assess the value of the cat bonds. Very interesting concept, by the way. I have, particularly in the wake of disaster resilience, cat bond can give effective solution for post-disaster recovery. This is the practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Very interesting article. To certain extent, you may get a question on that. Another important article is about redefining the second. So, what exactly is this article about is optical clocks will become the world's new standard around 2030. So, until this point, what we are using to define the second, particularly second, the unit of time, is cesium clocks. The accuracy of cesium clocks in that regard is used to measure the accurate second, the measurement of second. So, why is it needed? Why is it necessary to measure this 1 second accurately? Is because high precision is needed. It is must to measure time accurately up to 18 decimal places, particularly when it comes to the science and technology part, from GPS to climate models to whatnot. Accurate measurement of time, 1 second in particular, is very vital, and we are using the cesium clocks until now, atomic clocks, for that measurement, but we have found the more accurate measurement from optical clocks. But currently the optical clocks are in an experimental stage. We have seen the success in that regard, but by 2030 it may become a reality. So, we can shift from atomic clocks to optical clocks by 2030. Researchers worldwide conducted the largest and most demanding clock comparison to prepare for the redefinition of the second. This involved 10 optical clocks across 3 continents and 65 researchers in the most sophisticated test to date. Particularly, there is a need to redefine the second. As I said, we must measure time accurately up to 18 decimal places. Limitations of cesium clocks. Current cesium based definition insufficient for modern applications like GPS and climate sciences. Future transition, optical clocks expected to replace cesium clocks by 2030 pending validation. So, essentially we need more accurate measurement of time. So, for that optical clocks can give us better solution. Evolution of SI unit of time. So, this particular part here is very vital from the perspective of science and technology, general science prelims. Early 20th century, 1 second. In early 20th century, how we measure 1 second? 1 second equals 1 over 86,400 of a mean solar day. That is 1 second. By 1956, we redefined 1 second as 1 by 31,556,925.9747 of a tropical year. More accurate measurement. By 1967, current definition we adopted, 1 second is equal to 9192,631,770 periods of the radiation corresponding to transition between the 2 hyperfine levels of the ground state of cesium-133 atoms. So, essentially by 1967, we used cesium atomic clocks. So, when it comes to India's timekeeping system, it is maintained by National Physical Laboratory, New Delhi, and it operates 5 cesium clocks for accurate measurement of time. Output disseminated through INSAT satellites, telecom signals and fiber optic links. Current standard, by the way, is atomic clocks, cesium atomic clocks in particular. The second is currently defined using cesium atomic clocks. These clocks measure time by counting 9192,637,770 microwave radiation cycles emitted by cesium-133 atom at ground level. Atomic clocks do not directly measure time, but rely on generating radiation at fixed frequencies. Particularly frequency, why we measure frequency? Frequency is the inverse of time, or time is inverse of frequency, remember that, making frequency the core metric of timekeeping. Particularly when it comes to working of atomic clocks like cesium, atoms have fixed energy levels like rungs of ladder. So, this particularly the cesium clock, you can see the overall cesium clocks structure here. You have Ramsey cavity, you have detector, you have cesium oven, you have magnetic field shield, analyzer magnet, etc., etc. Particularly knowing the overall working is very, very vital of cesium clocks, but it may be complicated for non-science background students. Do not worry, you do not have to remember each and everything. Particularly atoms have fixed energy levels at constant ground level. Cesium atoms absorb energy via finely tuned microwave signals to jump energy levels. Maximum reaction occurs at exact the frequency that we earlier mentioned. Frequency dividers count and pass every 9192631770th wave to define 1 second. So, essentially the frequency is very, very accurate in that regard. So, it actually the reaction occurs exactly at this level, at this frequency, and every time at this frequency it repeats. So, essentially rising demand and limitations of cesium clocks, to know about this point is also very vital. Atomic clocks now support critical systems like GPS of USA, GLONASS Russia, Galileo of EU and NAVIC of India. Radio astronomy, it has uses in radio astronomy. Climate science, again, you know, is one area where accurate timekeeping is important. Cesium clocks, atomic clocks drift 1 second in 300 million years. So, you may see this fact as impressive, but not sufficient for some modern needs. 1 in 3 million years. So, essentially it will add, cesium clock will, it is accurate to such an extent that it will add 1 second in 300 million years. So, this is very, very accurate, but it is not sufficient considering our modern needs. So, optical clocks in that regard is the future. Optical clocks use light optical frequencies instead of microwaves. Cesium clocks, particularly microwaves, are to certain extent used, while optical clocks use light optical frequencies of strontium and ytterbium ion currently under consideration. You can see the frequency hertz here. So, one important thing to understand is more the frequency, higher the frequency, greater precision and stability is there. A 2014 strontium optical clock would drift less than 1 second in 15 billion years. So, you can see the accuracy, it is much more multifold accurate compared to atomic cesium clocks, expected to replace cesium clocks as the global standard by 2030. So, by 2030 we will switch to these optical clocks. Challenges before redefinition: optical clocks must synchronize accurately worldwide up to 18th decimal place, requires rigorous coordinated global test. So, we have that test in 2022 particularly, the results have been given here, just go through that briefly, not that much important. The final outcome is very, very vital of that particular experiment by the way. 10 optical clocks across 3 continents agreed within 10 raised to minus 16 to 10 raised to minus 18. So, to the 16th decimal to 18th decimal, it agreed to certain extent. The study cleared key hurdles towards redefining the SI second with optimal clocks by 2030. It is a very, very important study for redefinition of SI unit of second by 2030 in that regard. So, this is the practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Very, very vital from the perspective of prelims, particularly science and technology. Particularly in the decoded section now, we are going to take a look at the recent World Bank's recent report and the analysis of inequality. Particularly, what has happened now, according to the World Bank's latest poverty and equity brief, India's Gini index is 25.5, which makes it the world's fourth most equal country, according to the World Bank's data. After the Slovak Republic, Slovenia and Belarus, it reflects how the fruits of economic progress are being shared more evenly across the population. However, this claim has been questioned due to methodological concerns and differing data sources. This claim has been criticized a lot in recent times, but it also shows India's own achievements economically to certain extent as well. So, you cannot deny that particular achievement. Gini index, particularly, what exactly is the Gini index? You must be knowing it already. It measures inequality in income or wealth distribution within a country. So, 0 when what is the scale is 0 to 100. 0 equals perfect equality, everyone has the same income or wealth. 100 means perfect inequality, 1% has all the income or wealth, others have none. So, from 0 to 100 there is increasing inequality. Particularly key issues with the government's claim. What are the key issues, by the way, in this regard? India's consumption-based Gini index has improved from 28.8 in 2011-12 to 25.5 in 2022-23. So, it seems the inequality is reducing in India. However, inequality may be underestimated due to data limitations. So, what are the data limitations? We are going to look at some of the data limitations in that regard. But before that, the World Inequality Database shows that income inequality rose from Gini of 52 in 2004 to 62 in 2023. There is a World Inequality Database which shows income inequality rose in India from 52 in 2004 to 62 in 2023, showing the increasing income inequality. While wage disparity remains high, the top 10% earns 13 times more than bottom 10% in 2023-24 data. So, these are very shocking sort of data sets, data points here, and they contradict the World Bank's recent report. Although you can see the World Bank's inequality from 1961 to 2023, that analysis we have already covered in our DNA episodes. So, particularly the problems with measuring inequality. What are the problems with measuring inequality, by the way? Consumption versus income data. To map income inequality, India collects data on consumption. So, majority it is based on consumption and not on income itself, unlike other countries. It underestimates the level of inequality in a society. What are the reasons behind this particular underestimation? The variation in income is far greater than the variation in consumption. So, variation in income is more than consumption. Particularly wealthier individuals save more and their higher incomes do not reflect in consumption. Not necessarily it will reflect in consumption, but India only actually maps consumption based consumption based income inequality. Limitations of survey data. The calculation of inequality is unlikely to capture the widening gap between the bottom 10% and top 10% of the population. That can be very much possible. The rich tend to decline to participate in surveys much more than the poor do. It underestimates inequality if just a handful of extremely rich are driving up the inequality. Many times rich people does not actually take part in surveys. So, even the handful, if extremely rich people doesn't take part, it will actually harm, it will skew the data. Researchers have flagged this particular underestimation in developed countries like US, UK as well. There are problems with Gini index as well. It is not sensitive to changes at the extremes of population, but it is overly sensitive to changes in the middle. So, this is particularly the criticism of Gini index as well. So, what are the policy implications of inaccurate inequality assessments? Misallocation of resources is one. Welfare schemes may not reach those most in need in that regard if the inequality assessment is wrong. Worsening inequality, flawed policies may benefit the rich, widening the gap. Regressive fiscal measures, poorly designed taxes and subsidies may favor the affluent. Exclusion of vulnerable groups, targeted support may miss the poorest. Loss of public trust is another. Risk of social unrest is another. Hindered inclusive growth, skewed planning limits broad-based economic progress, delayed reforms, structural issues remain unaddressed due to distorted insights from such inequality assessments. So, what can be done in that regard? Combine household survey data with income tax records. This is the very interesting solution given in the article to more accurately capture top end incomes and correct the underestimation of inequality. You can definitely combine these two data points. Combine household survey data, which in recent times we have seen the launch of that data sets as well, survey in particular, with income tax records. Adopt alternative indicators. Use PAMA ratio alongside the Gini index to focus on disparities between top 10% and bottom 50%. offering a clearer picture of extreme inequality. So, what is this PAMA ratio, by the way? So, just go through briefly. We will explain this particular concept in another edition of PAMA or edition of daily news analysis, but you must know what exactly is the PAMA ratio. So, combine PAMA ratio with Gini coefficient, that will give more, that will keep more focus on the disparities between top 10% and bottom 50% of income, particularly of income quantile. Use multidimensional measures, complement income based metrics with education, health, wealth indicators to assess inequality more holistically, encourage independent research, support academic and institutional studies like those of World Inequality Lab to refine and validate inequality assessments. So, in conclusion, we can say, to address the inequality effectively, it is essential to move beyond limited measures like the consumption based Gini index. It will enable more accurate assessments and better informed inclusive policy decisions. So, you can note down some of the solutions suggested here, from using multidimensional poverty measures or using multidimensional measures to encouraging independent research. Most importantly, combine household survey data with income tax record. You can utilize or use some of these solutions effectively in your GS3 mains answer. So, this is the practice question for you particularly. This is it from my side, and stay tuned for daily news analysis for another edition. Thank you.